All right, let's just see how this goes. So today we're going to talk a little bit about game mechanics, specifically within your game, kind of the differences between probability and chance, both of which are super important, and they play a vital role in what we do in game design. Let me just open this up here. Um, so why include probability or chance? All right. Well, the important aspect of probability or chance is that it can add an element of randomness to your game. Right. So your games aren't just a matter of having strategy and employing that strategy. Chess is a great example. Checkers is a great example where there's a lot of strategy. There's not a whole lot of probability or chance with that because that's not how the game has been developed. Um, Probability and chance also help to level the playing field between new and experienced players. So, for those of us that play games, many of us have been in that position where someone says, "Hey, come over and try this out. You'll enjoy it. You'll love it. This will be the greatest game ever." And you sit down and you don't know what you're doing, and you just sit through however many hours of being whooped on by someone who's much more experienced than yourself. Those games usually have a lot of strategy and skill involved. If there was more chance or probability, it would really level out the playing field. Now, knowing the rules certainly helps and kind of what you can and can't do. But the more probability or chance a game has, the better your odds are of beating a player who has more experience than you in playing that game. It can increase or decrease the competitiveness or cooperation between players. Um, it allows the game to be different every time you play, even if it's the same game with the same type of rules and the same mechanics. The way that you achieve those goals can vary from game to game, and that's what makes the games more interesting. And allows for different levels of skill to be implemented. So you play a game that has more chance in it. Um, Levels of someone who has no skill versus someone who has tons of skill, it doesn't make a difference. A great example there would be like the game of craps at the casino, right? Anyone, if they have the money, can step up to the table and roll the dice. Um, whether you're experienced at playing craps or not, the act of rolling the dice is a chance piece. Now, knowing how to play the game and where to place your bets and when to stop betting because you feel like a player might be coming off their run, that's totally different animal. But the chance portion, the rolling of the dice in that game, you don't have to be a super experienced craps player to roll the dice uh, and to be successful. So let's talk a little bit about what probability is, and I've provided a link here to Wikipedia that explains in more detail kind of what probability is. But essentially, when we distill it down, it's the measure of the likelihood that an event will occur. All right. When you look at probabilities, they are a percentage of all of the total outcomes that are possible. Um, when you're designing your game, this allows you to bring in variety. It allows you to understand kind of what the probabilities are for the game mechanic you're using. In this case, we'll use a white and a black die. All right, and when you're designing your game, you've got some options. So you can, and I'll give some examples of this a little bit later, but you can say anytime a player rolls a 2 or a 12, something really cool is going to happen, right? Or they're going to get some resources. I know when I play Monopoly with my family, we have a house rule whenever you roll snake eyes, which is the colloquial term for rolling 2 1s. But whenever you roll snake eyes, the banker has to give you one of every denomination in the bank. So you get a 1, 5, 10, 20, 50, 100, and 500. Just for rolling snake eyes. You don't get anything for rolling double 12s. I don't know why that is, because they literally have the exact same amount of probability. But ever since I was a kid, rolling snake eyes was a good thing in Monopoly. You might have games where you want certain events to occur more often than others. So if at the start of your turn, players roll the dice. If the events that you want to happen when a 6, a 7, or 8 is rolled, and that's whether you have 2 different colored dice or the same colored dice. Um, if it's a 6 or 7 or 8 that you're looking for, right, then you can kind of have those events happen more often than not. Whereas you might want good things to happen more often, might want bad things to happen more often. You might want certain types of interaction between players in the game to happen more often. And that's kind of where knowing the probability of your game mechanics comes in handy. So this is just an example of just having two six-sided dies, right? If something in the game happens, when there's a 7 that's rolled, there's a 1 in 6 chance that they're going to roll a 7. There's less chance that they'll roll a 6 or an 8 when you add the dice total up, and less of a chance that there'll be a 5 or a 9, or a 4 or a 10, or a 3 or an 11, or a 2 or 12. So just knowing kind of that the probability is essentially, each probable event, each likelihood that event will happen is a percentage of the total possible outcomes that can happen. And this will be the first slide where I give you the keyword for your exam. Your first keyword is highlighter. So when using probability, and I talked a little bit about this, it lets the designer determine events after a mechanic of chance has been used. So here's a good example. The first image there, the colorful one, that's from a game called The Settlers of Catan. It's a great game. They call it the Monopoly Killer, just because it's gained so much. It's played worldwide. It's an exceedingly popular game. It started in Germany. It's worked its way over here to the United States. They have tournaments and all different kinds of stuff. But as an example, in this game, say you're the red player and you have two little red houses, and those two little red sticks, those are roads. Or there's two little red houses, I guess they call those settlements in the game. But say someone rolls a 3, right? If somebody rolls a 3, any player rolls a 3, that tile produces a resource. And for every settlement, or for every house that is touching that tile, the player that owns that settlement collects one of those resources. So you have this element of chance, right, the roll of the dice, but we know that there's the probability of rolling a 3 is a lot lower than, say, if it was a 6, or if it was an 8, or even if it was a 9 or a 5. And so you can see there's also a 9 there. That's a different type of resource. That little gray figure in the middle, that is a game mechanic. Whenever a 7 is rolled, that token, that little gray token, he's called a robber, he's moved from one resource tile, right, to another. So he might be moved from the 3 to the 11. And whoever rolled the 7 gets to move. They get to choose where he goes. So 7 is the chance. The probability is it's going to happen pretty often. 1 in 6 times the dice are rolled, the robber is going to be moved. Well, that's a probability. It's not always 1 in 6, but that's how probability works. There's a 1 in 6 chance. Anyways, then a player gets to place them somewhere else, and then there's some interactions that happen between players in the game. All right, so moving that robber is a good thing for the player that rolls the 7. There's another mechanic that happens in the game if a 7 is rolled, and you have over a certain number of cards. You have to discard some cards. So there's some good and bad things that happen pretty regularly when a 7, which is the most common number that's rolled, when you have two six-sided dice in the game. All right? So that's, there's some chance, there's some probability. Catan is very different every time you play, and it is open to all levels of skill, right? People that are really good at Catan can dominate a board, and people that aren't really good at Catan can learn really quick how to play and become good players. The picture that's to the right of that is a Dungeon Master's screen for Dungeons and Dragons, and there's just some probability tables and some other tables in there. So say a player wants to do something in the game. Say they want to try to pick the lock on a door, right? On that table, there is this spreadsheet that kind of lays out if the player is a level 1 and the door is particularly hard to pick, right? That player has to roll a dice, game of chance, right? And depending on the outcome of that dice will depend on whether or not they're successful or not. So Dungeons & Dragons has a lot of those setup game mechanics in advance where players are trying to do certain activities, and depending on their skill level and what they roll on the dice, Those get combined together for a score. That score is compared to what's in that table, and then the overseeing game master says whether or not they were successful or not. Or sometimes there's varying levels of success. So if they say there's the option of, they want to learn more about the history of the city. And so they roll the dice. Like, do I understand what the history of this city is? I've lived here for a while. Do I know enough about the history of this city to help us on our quest? And there might be 4 different levels of knowledge that the game master would give them, depending on the roll that they rolled. So that can either help or hinder players, and depending on how well they rolled, their chance, right? That kind of determines how much information is given to them. But the probability piece really is what we're focusing on, is how you design it into the game, knowing what dice or what game mechanics are used, right, and then how the interaction between those outcomes and the game play together. So what is chance? I know I've mentioned it a couple times. Well, chance, I'm sure many of you may have heard the phrase, it's a roll of the dice, it's, luck of the draw or draw of the cards, flip of a coin, draw from a hat. Chance, there's no skill required. Chance is literally, as its name would imply, it's just chance. Right? Some people refer to it as luck. There's little to no strategy. It can be positive, it can be negative or neutral. So I've got some different images here of different types of chance. Drawing names from a hat, or in this case, names from a large bowl. Right? That's, some of you might pick up on that movie reference, but that's an option of chance. Now, for those of you that have seen The Hunger Games, which is it's a movie that came out recently. If you've read the books or seen the movie, you'll understand that the names that are in that bowl are placed in there depending on how many times individuals have had to make a withdrawal from a food bank or other things. So people that are more needy have to put their name into that bowl more often. Now, drawing the name is chance, but the probability that a name will be drawn will depend on how many times a name is put into the bowl. Right? So the probability changes. The chance happens at random, the chance drawing. But the probability of something being drawn can depend on how many possible outcomes there are. So we'll just say, for example, there were a total of 500 names in that bowl, and you were someone who had your name in there 50 times for something. Or there's a 1 in 10 chance your name's going to get pulled, right? As opposed to someone who might only have their name in there 5 times. Right? There's a 1 in 20 chance that their name will be pulled. They're less likely to be pulled than yourself. But after you jumble everything up and name is drawn, the drawing is the chance piece. The one in the middle, that is a Super Bowl coin toss, right? Heads or tails. And I've looked at those coins. I can't see a head or a tail on them. I think that refers to a traditional quarter or a coin that has... I always think of a quarter, it has the head of George Washington or the tail of the eagle. I guess you can just decide, which is head and which is tails. Either way, it's a 50-50 shot, In this instance, it would be exceedingly rare that coin, as thick as it is, would fall and land on the edge. So, in this case, it's 50-50, right? We're going to flip a coin, someone's going to call it. There is no way to determine what that coin is going to land on after it flips through the air, I don't know how many times, and lands on the ground. The last one is pick a card from a deck. Now, the advantage here, depending on what you're asking someone to pick, will depend on their likelihood of success. So say you just say pick a card, any card, and there's some kind of bonus if you choose a heart. Well, for those of us that have played cards, if there are no jokers, right, there's a 1 in 4 chance of picking a heart, versus a spade, versus a diamond, versus a club. When you throw the jokers in there, it changes that percentage just a little bit. And for those of you that are familiar with games of chance, like at the casino, it's very much like playing roulette. You can either bet on red or you can bet on black. But for those of us that have spent any time at a roulette table, if you're not betting on individual numbers, if you're just going red or black, there's also 0, and in some cases, double 0. So it's not 50-50. And I've been down that road, having a little bit of money on betting all on red or betting it all on black, and all of a sudden that zero rolls up, and